Welcome to our seminar this morning. It's a real interesting topic that we have today, I think. A little bit of a personal anecdote here. Um, I grew up many, many years ago on a lake in the northern part of the Twin Cities here. And when I grew up on the lake, most of it was natural lakeshore. And over the years, I've seen just more and more and more of that disappear as people develop their lakeshore into what it is that they wanted to see, right? This kind of urbanized aesthetic, as our speaker today put it. Until now, there's very little of that natural lakeshore left. And really been painful for me to witness. And so, I think we're all aware that protecting natural lakeshore has become just an increasingly important part of preserving lake quality. And today we're going to hear from Tom Langer about the Carnelian Marine St. Croix Watershed District. The watershed covers 81 square miles and 31 lakes that have gradually been losing, like in what I think we've all seen, been losing their natural lakeshore. Tom is going to tell us about the district's efforts to monitor and evaluate the watershed's lakeshore and the lakes in that watershed based on water quality, biological health trends, lakes of high quality and protection status, and total development pressure. His work, as he put it in his abstract, his work included the evaluation of over 600 property parcels on lakes and nearly 40 miles of lakeshore across 10 prioritized lakes. Tom is an aquatic biologist who is focused on understanding how the aquatic environments and human stressors shape the biotic communities of lakes, streams, and wetlands. He currently works for the Carnelian Marine St. Croix Watershed District as a riparian and regulatory specialist, in which he engages citizens and contractors on the importance of shoreland and shoreline habitats. So the trend of Minnesota's vanishing lake shores can be restored to a balance of what landowners want and what the lakeshore needs. Tom, hey, it is great to have you with us this morning. Why don't you take it away? The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, yeah, for that great introduction. And I just have to first echo, like, yeah, that whole concept of vanishing shores. I've been fortunate to be one of the Minnesotans that I've grown up ever since I was a little kid, sitting on the end of my parents' dock, looking into the water. And even in my lifetime, I'll say that I've begun to notice changes. So this is a topic that hits near and dear. And then given my biological background, I find it really fascinating. So, yeah, for those of you that maybe aren't familiar with our watershed district, we are located in northern Washington County. We are governed by a board of 7 managers, and as of Monday, we actually have our we bumped up to 3 staff, so that's a great capacity has been a struggle for us. So, and then yeah, we are a very water rich geography, and our water resources, given our proximity to the metro, are um, phenomenal. Water clarity generally is really high. We have a lot of groundwater. Of our 21 streams, 20 of them are cold water, groundwater systems. So, and then the St. Croix River, almost all 18 and a half miles comprise National Park Scenic Way. So a very pretty and gorgeous watershed. Um, what I want to start off and share on today's topic, I'll say this presentation is really going to be 2 parts. My colleague Mike Eisensee is going to be sharing on the topic as well in a few weeks, and he is really going to talk about kind of the front half and the back half of this story. And I'm going to really tell the middle part of what the science is telling us, how that then we developed a monitoring program, and then what the results are. And Mike's focus is going to be, why did that become a priority for the watershed, and how did we come up with a management plan that built in these lakeshore objectives? And then on the back end, he's going to cover in the engagement. So what are we going to do? Who do we need to reach out to, and all of that? But I'm going to go back to this slide. Out of these objectives, the one that I think is important for my discussion here today is the board came up with three different kind of topics, and one of them is they had created a measurable goal of trying to progress towards 75 of all lakeshore parcels having 50% natural shoreline condition. Um, and I'll show some images of like what that visually looks like. But that was the standard that was written into a report. And really what that meant for me as staff is I needed to come up with a monitoring plan that would baseline and quantify these conditions and then allow us to track that through time. So, quick overview of what I'm going to cover today. Again, I take the opportunity here to actually play biologist, not just regulator. So I'm going to cover a little bit of my understanding of the science of lake health from a fish and shoreline perspective. And then I'm going to share what also helped us as a watershed district kind of kick this type of program off with some of the findings of the MPCA and the DNR in terms of what were they finding for fish, shoreline health, and stressor work within our watershed. And then I'll dive into some of our actual survey methods and results. So I'm going to start off the science of using fish to inform on lake health. There's a great team within the DNR, the Fish IBI team, I always call them, that has done a lot of work. And I believe a lot of people at the MPCA have probably overlapped and worked with this group to actually help come up with these lake assessment categories. So depending on the community of fish, it can be rated as an exceptional community, fully supporting, vulnerable, not supporting, and then kind of not enough info. And then just as at a statewide level, like a lot of things, you start to see different trends. So this aquatic life assessment map here, the blue and purple means, fully supporting or exceptional. And then using the stoplight theme, you kind of move down to red where it's not supporting. And again, our geography is that just northeast metro area where we kind of have a combination of this. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because the next slides I'm going to go into are going to talk, or they're just going to highlight some of these different categories. But I like to kind of do this in a really fun, engaging way. So I know this isn't necessarily interactive, but I'll kind of play the part of what people have expressed back. So I like starting with this one. With crowds and audiences in terms of this is commonly the fish that people tell me that they know. Sorry, I'm gonna just tell me that they know, and I go, okay, so what are some of the common names? And typically people share names that they're familiar with: sunny, trout, bass, perch, bullhead, and sucker minnow. And then I ask, well, how do you know about these fish? And the most common answer I always get is it's either the fish we catch and eat, or it's the bait we use to catch the fish. And for majority of people, this is where their knowledge of fisheries kind of ends. But then I love to share this, and this is actually all the fish within our watershed district's big three lakes. And then recently I did a joint presentation with Riley Purgatory Bluff Creek Watershed District. So kind of in the opposite corner of the metro from us. And I just pooled together our fisheries. And these are actually all the fish that are in our lakes. And what I find really funny is when people see all these other little fish, this is what commonly people, if they look out in the water and they see a small fish, they just call it a minnow. And in common terms, minnow is synonymous with small fish, but actually the minnow species, there's only a few fish in here that are actually minnows. So I like to do that. But so now I'm just going to flash through, and this is where I would typically ask people, let me know when you see a significant change in difference. And looking at, I've also included up in the right corner here, the IBI score, the Index of Biotic Integrity, and in the of 45, this would be considered supporting, back to that lake assessment category. So this species richness is supporting. Big Carnelian Lake is nearly impaired, slightly lower score. Big Marine is slightly less than that. And typically people are kind of shaking their head like, boy, that is like, there's no difference there. Like how is that impaired or supporting? Well, then we move into Riley Purgatory Creeks and the score hardly changed, but okay, people start to see some of the fish species disappear. And then we move into an impaired lake and even more species diversity is gone. And then we move into the other ones and diversity amount might have remained the same, but now we might be gaining some species that are indicative of poor habitat and quality. So I like stepping through this because I think it just helps people visualize. And so how does an IBI work? This is my bare bones understanding and what I like to share with people is um, some just different fish facts. So fish have what's called continuous growth, and they generally eat what they can fit their mouth around. So a healthy lake will support multiple sizes of an individual species. So you can have small fish, medium size of that fish, and then large body. That would generally be a healthy ecosystem of or healthy fishery. Fish also have diet preferences. So we have fish that prefer to eat fish. We have fish that prefer to eat bugs. We have fish that prefer to forage in the organic material of the lake bottom. And honestly, again, a healthy lake generally supports all of these different feeding preferences. Um, Fish have also habitat preferences. I love pointing out, people think of the walleye. Well, you're usually not fishing for a walleye off your dock. You're fishing for it out in the deep water. If you're a bass fisherman, you're casting along the shoreline in the weeds or along trees and things like that. So fish have habitat preferences, and a healthy lake will provide multiple habitats for fish and their food. Um, and then really when it gets to the stressor side of things is stressors on a lake or in a fish community can be small or large. And what I'd love to share with people is large stressors make headlines. This is things like winter kill, severe ice and winter kill, and looks like all the fish bubble up in the surface and all of our phones start ringing as lake managers saying like, what happened? Why are all these fish dying? And generally, I love to say that a lake and a fishery will generally rebound from a large stressor such as that. It's the small, subtle changes that occur over time. It's the subtle loss of a species. It's the subtle conversion of habitat where that's really what leads to a breakdown in the resilience and robustness of that lake ecosystem. Um, so ultimately, it's the concept of taking all of these things. It's not fish health is not just diversity. It's a conglomerate of all of these things. And I'll just say, if you're really interested in that topic, I would encourage you to visit DNR's website on the Fish IBI or contact that team. Like I said, great staff, very knowledgeable on this topic. But what it all boils down to is some fish for us are really good indicators. Where I love to point out some fish indicate bad things. So the boxes outlined in red as these types of fish increase in abundance or presence in a lake, they generally indicate things that are degrading the lake ecosystem. Then on the other end in green here, we have fish that generally indicate things that are natural about a system. So shoreline substrate, water quality, vegetation health, is there woody structure. And then we have very iconic species, but they're not good indicators. And why? It's because we've put them everywhere. Walleye is the perfect example. It's not really used in the IBIs from the standpoint of it just indicates how well we've been able to stock and recruit and do different things. So not really getting at lake health, but definitely a recreation side of things. So there's my 101 crash course on like fish IBI. Now I'm just going to give you an intro to my understanding of the science of lakeshore health and what makes a healthy lakeshore. So some of this I actually really love. So this was a study done back in 2000 or published in 2006. And I love it from the standpoint, this is the UW-Madison football team getting out and actually removing woody habitat from a lake. They curtained it off. They started to remove the woody habitat, and then they wanted to measure what happened. So my Cliff Notes version of what happened, I won't explain these figures, but in essence, what happened is they were looking at largemouth bass, and that fish, its available food had changed, therefore it was forced to change its diet. It was no longer eating what it preferred, but what was available. That diet shift was considered to be a lower quality and less available food source. So in the end, what happened is the overall fitness and health of the largemouth bass in this lake started to decline. For the people that don't know much about fish but love to, or the intricacies but love to fish themselves, what this really take-home message is this meant less fish for you to fish for and less trophy-size fish. The science of lakeshore plants. This is a phenomenal study that looked into dragonflies from their larval stage all the way to the adult, and the importance of both submergent and emergent vegetation. And in essence here, removing plants led to decreased survivability, which in the end for people that enjoy sitting around a campfire means you're swatting more mosquitoes, gnats, and things like that. So lakeshore plants and submergent vegetation, very important to how we recreate and utilize our lake shores. In terms of shoreline type, here was some studies that looked at the type of shoreline, the dominant shoreline type, and what that meant for species diversity and resilience and robustness. These are considered, or these are called species occurrence curves, where generally the higher and the longer the line, the better. And really it just basically says at what point do you stop sampling new habitats and no longer find new species. So what we see here is natural shoreline conditions. Generally, you have to sample more sites to finally max out the diversity. Then you move into riprap, seawalls, and beaches. And again, the science behind this is you're slowly just creating a monodominant type system of either rock, wall, or sand. And sand is very detrimental in the fact that it just basically smothers everything. So they saw this for both macroinvertebrates and fish. And then the last thing I'll share here, a final study looking at kind of the intricacies of a food web and how that related back to shoreline type. So they assessed a handful of lakes and just showing diagrams from one where they sampled how complex is the food web. And just the schematic here, obviously the webbing of all this just means a very intricate and dynamic food web. And we saw that the most abundant or diverse complex food web was in an undeveloped natural shoreline. And then as we moved into retaining wall or beach, you can see how simple in comparison on the same lake that food web in that general area was considered. So really the take home of what the science is telling us is it's very clear. Woody debris, coarse woody habitat, emergent, submergent vegetation is very important to the overall health of a lake, and shoreline modifications to rock and beach and sand is very detrimental. So these shoreline modifications and habitat removals are negatively influencing lake ecosystems. So if you're not familiar with a paper has recently been published called Minnesota's Vanishing Natural Shorelines. Just taking tidbits of this, I think it's fascinating in the sense that they looked at all lots. They started breaking things down by residential lots and what is the overall shoreline health, according to an assessment method called Score the Shore. And you can see that as we move from all lots into residential, only looking at residential lots, the pie chart starts to change in the sense that the scores are lower. While looking at specifically Washington, all of Washington County where I am, that degradation is even more exaggerated, being probably in the proximity of the metro and greater development pressure. So this is really, again, I think a core issue and why probably many of you are here, that this isn't surprising. We know that that's happening. So at this stage, I'm going to transition and get into, so thanks for bearing with me while I was able to give you kind of that intro to fisheries and lakeshore health. But now, specifically for our geography on these two realms, what has the state found on our behalf? I'll frame it that way. And we have 3 lakes that size-wise are greater than 100 acres, and they meet the criteria to actually do the fisheries IBI. And just color coding things basic here in terms of we have 2 lakes that are vulnerable or near impairment status. And then we have one lake that's considered fully supporting. And overall, though, looking at the trends of this assessment work through time, we have declining trends. So we anticipate that degradation is going to get worse and the likelihood of true impairment status is increasing. And the top stressor has been acknowledged to potentially be shoreline development. So then DNR went in and did their protocol of Score the Shore. For those that aren't familiar, it's a rapid lakeshore assessment tool with the goals of determining lake-wide lakeshore habitat condition and then trying to detect substantial changes through time. They don't survey necessarily every parcel, but they try to do equidistant spaced out points across the lake. And again, what you can see here is our previously fully supporting lake had a moderate development pressure, which I'll say in the case of this is good. And then we had a low and a very low classification, and these were our two lakes that are near impairment. So there seemed to be a strong relationship between these two. Here is another finding and kind of breaking down of this, where again, interestingly, the dashed lines here, I'll just explain, they break down to those different health classifications and categories. The white bars are undeveloped sites on each of these lakes, and then the black bars are developed sites on these lakes. So again, this is strongly signaling that humans are the reason for the decline, or development pressure, I should say, is the reason for the decline of the health of these lakeshore properties on these lakes. So boiling all that up into some stressor identification work, it was reported that Big Carnelian Lake and Big Marine Lake were at risk for biological impairment. Going through the stressor identification process, the really standout thing was very clearly stating that lakeshore development pressure is the cause and or the most likely candidate to cause, and then restoration is needed on these developed parcels. And transitioning, so what is really needed to come back? It's these critical habitats. It's things along the shoreline that are deep rooted, woody and coarse in nature. It's trees to provide screening, aesthetic, but also habitat. And it's that aquatic and emergent vegetation out in the lake. And then there's different forms of woody structures. I say, this is your overhanging. This is great for bird perching and things like that. Shade for fish that like to be protected from potentially avian predators. You have your loafing logs or turtle sticks, or that your ducks and turtles will bask on. And then you have your coarse woody material out in the lake or down, and these often are considered called fish sticks. So these are really the core and critical habitats. So transitioning then into taking the science and what the state was telling us in terms of the impairment, we wanted to come up with a measurable management goal that we could target. And so out of our plan, again, the goal was 75% of our lakeshore parcels are at 50% naturalized condition or not. So this is my schematic representation of what that looks like. Our district goal is not to create the boundary waters where there's no development. We're trying to balance that human use with what the lake needs. And the manager struck this concept of this is what we are trying to target. But as you'll see, we're getting a lot of these other more degraded. So what that meant again for me as staff is I needed to come up with a protocol to actually quantify this, and not wanting to reinvent the wheel, adapting and adopting the DNR Score the Shore or Score Your Shore type protocols was great. And I kind of coin and say that I call it now Score Our Shore, because what I've done is I've taken the DNR Score the Shore protocol and adapted it. And the major ways that I adapted it is trying to ask questions that I guess I'll say the protocol does a really good job of outlining really rapid ways to assess the natural habitat conditions that exist. We adapted it to then also answer, well, if the habitat isn't there, what is replacing it? So in our shoreland areas, questions related to what types of structures and are they within ordinance setbacks, meaning like is the LGU allowing things to be built closer to the lake than kind of model ordinance language? Shoreline pressures. So if the desired things are disappearing, water dominant characteristics, meaning like, is it a beach? Is it riprap shoreline, or what else is there? And then out in the lake, we kind of just advanced upon the recreational items in terms of how many boats, docks, things like that, where we seen things like weed rollers, all of that. So this is also a process for us that some of our lake local stakeholders, we held a meeting and asked them for things that they might find valuable. And in the end, we came up with a good product that we're still able to collect everything according to the DNR and score the shore so that we can kind of compare what we're finding to lake-wide measures, but then we're also able to really do some things at a local level. So as we kind of introduced early, at the time of this, we were a staff of 2, but we had 31 lakes, and there wasn't a capacity for us to actually sample all 31 lakes. And some of our lakes are kind of in one land ownership, large farm or something like that. So there maybe wasn't the pressure. So we had to go through an exercise of actually dwindling that 31 lakes down to 10. So really, it became an exercise of looking at water quality, biological trends. We looked at things in terms of what was a high quality water resource or had high protection standards, and then looking at lakes that were developing or redeveloping so that, the cabins being torn down and larger homes being built, encompassing things like total lots density. And then what was some of the existing shoreline conditions? So in the end, we settled on the list of 10 lakes here. And then here's just some of the information about each of those lakes in terms of the amount of shoreline miles, the number of land parcels on each of them. So some of them, again, smaller lakes with pretty large parcels. And then we move into, here's a picture of Big Marine Lake, our biggest lake that has quite a bit of shoreline mileage, but it also has a lot of properties, and then how many of those parcels are actually single family residential developed parcels. So in the end, we did almost sample 40 miles of shoreline and almost 650 parcels. How did we go about doing this? This is probably the area where I'm going to spend the least amount of time diving into, but if this is something that you're really interested in, we partnered with the Washington Conservation District and their district engineer, Rebecca Nestingen, and she really helped us pull this together. But I'll say the goal was we didn't want to do every survey via paper, and we knew the technologies were there using ARC and Survey 123 softwares. But in essence, we just had to plot out each individual parcel around a lake, assign a survey point, come up with questions in a form that could easily be answered on our phone or tablet. Then it was really hopping in the boat and doing the survey protocol similar to Score the Shore methodology, snapping photos. And then on the back end is great because of all the digital aspect of it is the streamlining of mapping out. So here's just a graphic image again of what is the dominant shoreline type from natural or bioengineered design, a restored shoreline or riprap beach, and then others kind of like turf grass or bare dirt into the lake. So started to be able to see regional lake trends, regional trends, neighborhood, community trends, and all of that. But then the other part of this is we knew that this survey wouldn't just be we do it once and never come back to it. We wanted to baseline it and then track it through time. So it was really important to build in a temporal aspect so we could go back to the same survey point, pull in the previous survey, and then see, does the same condition that we surveyed previously still exist on the landscape, or did we need to make some modifications? So that capacity is all within the tools and abilities, which is great. So then transitioning here into, okay, so what did we see as the watershed? So again, just as a recap, the state was telling us that individual lakeshore property owners were likely the cause of the degraded shoreline habitat. Well, in essence, we found a very similar trend. But across these 10 lakes, we had significant variability from, I'll say, generally high quality lakes all the way down to lakes that were highly degraded. And then what I've done is I built in kind of what is the district average lakeshore health, and then what is the state's average lakeshore health. So overall, our watershed is not doing as well as the state average, but we're really being pulled down by a subset of lakes while we still have some high quality lakes. And then these green lines just indicate what were the three lakes again that the state had previously assessed. We had Square Lake, which was the fully supporting of the fish health, and then we had Big Marine and Big Carnelian lakes, which were the nearly impaired. So great news, our results follow kind of similar of what the state was, which is a great thing. And again, the nuance was we were just serving every individual parcel versus kind of 20 or 40 points across an entire lake. So great to see that there's some correlation between the resolution there. But then the other thing is, I think that has been probably one of the most valuable takeaways from this is the concept of a photo is worth 1,000 words. And sharing this, that I've color coded it based on, again, kind of the health breakdown systems. And we have habitats or shoreline property owners where between the home and the lake, there is zero natural conditions. There's no trees, there's no shrubs, there's no natural ground cover. There's a retaining wall, a rock wall, and it's lot line to lot line beach. And then we move all the way through the spectrum where we start to gain some of those features back. And then we move into, here are two examples of this one would really be what the district goal is that 50% or greater. And then this is one, obviously the house is, I've circled it, it's tucked way back, but you can see predominantly a natural shoreline, but still having that use of a small little sand blanket, a dock, boat lift, swimming raft over off to the side. So really powerful to be able to collect this and share this with people. So what did we find? Oh, maybe I'll go back. You're going to see a lot of slides with a lot of graphic, and I'll kind of walk through some of those. But the key thing, if you don't see anything else, just know that when you see green, green is good. It means it's indicating one of these two, where the other colors are kind of not quite meeting our district goal. But again, the way we collected the information, we were able to break things down by all of our lakes and then within those different rankings and categories. And we have everything from shoreland trees, shrubs, and natural ground cover. So just kind of indicating what we're looking at. And this is that area from kind of between the home and the top of the shoreline. Where were these habitats? So kind of interesting here that, again, we're seeing kind of a change in across the spectrum, but overall, this was our lowest rated zone according to the survey protocol. And really, the concern here is actually a full lack of understory. So when we move down to shrubs and ground cover, you can see a lot of red, and red is just meaning that this form of habitat is absent. So what it means is we're getting trees that are trimmed up and they're providing a high level shade canopy, but the understory, nothing's there. And then potentially, well, again, our features being built or what's there. Our development pressure was changing. We were seeing cabins become homes. But again, so this is our shoreland habitat. In terms of the shoreline itself, similarly that we were seeing kind of a gradient in spectrum. Again, this is right at kind of that water land interface. But overall, this was actually our top rated zone, according to the survey protocol, in that we definitely had pockets of where a few shrubs and ground cover, emergent vegetation, things like that were coming up. But when it wasn't in a natural state, it just tended to be 100% of either rock, sand, or mowed turf. Moving out into the lake, this was a metric that we collected and just trying to get at, was it present on the parcel? So not really quantifying did you have downed woody habitat across 100% of your shoreline? Just did you have a fallen tree or a leaning tree, something like that? So just, again, those three different tree types. But what really stood out to us in this entire graphic, again, are two nearly impaired water resources for biological health. Were really lacking loafing logs, downed woody habitat, or that structure for fish, turtles, nesting birds, things like that. In terms of Lakeshore plant health, what jumped out to us here is it was kind of an all or nothing. You were either excellent or you were absent. And some of this could be due to natural factors where your lakeshore, just where you are on a lake, you might not really be a good location for emergent vegetation. You might have high fetch, really exposed conditions. And then, you get into some protected areas and you tended to just have a lot more emergent vegetation. But that said, we also did see quite a bit of intentional clearing and removal, uncertain though regulated or unregulated activities. That wasn't kind of the premise of collecting that data, but just an interesting note here. And again, one of our lakes, Big Carnelian, emergent vegetation largely absent from the shoreline. So kind of stepping back, what this allowed us to do then was kind of look at all the different types of habitat metrics for an individual lake. So I'm picking on Fish Lake here because it was our lake that generally support was moderate quality or meeting a lot of the district's goals. And this graphic here just shows you how far away each individual metric for our lakeshore health is from meeting our district goal. And then we kind of move to the other end of the spectrum where here's Big Carnelian Lake, where we're a long ways away from any of our shoreline health metrics meeting our district goal of having 75% of the parcels. And really restoration is going to be needed in all of these zones. Similarly, a different way to kind of look at this same lake was what actually surprised us is the number of parcels that are completely absent of these critical habitats. So that's what these bars represent, is the number of percentage of parcels that these forms of habitat are completely absent. And this lake again had roughly 200 parcels. So when we're talking, a quarter of that, 50 parcels, or like I said, some of these aquatic habitat metrics, basically all 200 parcels, maybe one or two parcels on the entire lake had some form of that. So maybe not as alarming to people because if it's high density, people want to swim, recreate, so they pull things like that out. But maybe thinking back, out of 200 parcels, almost 100 of them had no form of natural ground cover or trees or shrubs within it. So pretty alarming in terms of that. And so now the question of, okay, the habitat was not there, what was replacing it? And this is a great image of an example property line where property line here goes up to the other end of the rock. And you can see that this lakeshore, there is nothing natural. There's no natural component to it. You can see installed tiki bars, porches, pathways, walls, patios, boulder walls, beach, riprap, all within what's considered the shore impact zone, or where local ordinances generally don't allow these types of things to happen. So what did we see on this front? Again, we collected information in the shoreland about what types of features or structures were within the setback, and then breaking that down. And this is the one that I'll call out, Little Carnelian. It's a great example. This is a natural environmental lake. It's probably got about 40 or 30-ish landowners on it, and they generally all own very large parcels. But like every lake user they generally all want the same sort of things. And here's a great example where none of this is technically allowed by local zoning. And they've actually done some filling out into the lake and issues like that. So these are prevalent problems, but the beauty of what we've done is we've now quantified some of this on these individual lakes of what types of features are we seeing. And I say that, and not all these features are bad. Like, again, if the goal is to promote recreation and access, things like steps might be needed. Or if setbacks are a long ways away from the lake, allowing a little shed or something down by the lake might be an important local authority decision so that people don't have to trek things back and forth. But nonetheless, kind of interesting to see, again, Big Carnelian Lake for us. Over 75% of the parcels had significant features within setbacks. So then moving into the shoreline area, this blue line again represents the district goal of 75% of parcels. And interestingly, the three lakes that were assessed by the state in our watershed are the three lowest scoring in terms of the shoreline, where Square Lake was that fully supporting, but near getting closer and closer, and then the other two here. But the graphic here just represents what is the dominant shoreline type. So 50% or more of your 51% or more of your shoreline being comprised of one of these dominant forms of rock, beach, turf, other. And you can see again that this natural condition is not the dominant on our two most degraded lakeshore or lake shores. Digging into a little bit more, again, the photos are worth 1,000 words, but rock and sand are increasing and becoming very normalized. We'll be repeating this survey work, but just looking at some historic photos is once one person tends to adopt sand or rock, their neighbors start to look at it, and pretty soon you end up with communities where you're not even talking lot line to lot line, beach or rock, you're just talking entire shorelines that encompass the same type of shoreline. But then there's also within a localized area, there sometimes are differences with how people are pursuing shorelines. And this is equally powerful when talking with neighbors. And the example here is the landowner on the bottom came in expressing concern because his shoreline was undercutting because he had turf grass to water. But what he wanted is he wanted to put in a rock wall, and local rules don't necessarily allow that. So then we were talking to him about a natural shoreline design, and he wasn't convinced that it would work. But then we just were able to point to a few houses down saying, while you might not want this exact look or from toe of slope to top of bank, there are ways to stabilize a shoreline using native plants and shrubs. So equally powerful. So all that said is going through all that really rigorous exercise of looking at the data and stuff kind of backed away. And I kind of love this table because it just summarizes each of the different lakes and then the different lakeshore zones and the types of habitats within it. And these, again, all encompass what the district goal is of getting back to that 75% of parcels having 50%. The numbers that you see within this table are the number of individual landowners that we need to work with to meet our district goal. So again, I'll look at Big Carnelian Lake. To meet our shoreland tree goal, we need to work with 72 landowners to plant more trees. We need to work with 130 landowners to plant more shrubs. So I think you're getting the message here of this is not necessarily an easy feat, and it's going to take a lot to work with landowners to move the needle on some of these other lakes. Smaller engagement effort, but nonetheless just as important. So I'm getting close to wrapping up here. What are the potential solutions? This is going to be my teaser and reminder that in a few weeks, my colleague, Mike Eisensee, is going to largely lead another presentation where he's going to talk more in depth about what are some of these solutions. Now that we have this baseline of information, we're engaging realtors, contractors, local community council members, Lakeshore citizens, and we can share some of our early experiences and what we're learning and we're doing. But really the solutions kind of come back to one of these four categories. Are we educating and providing resources to landowners? As regulators, are we upholding rules? Are our regulations making sense? In terms of permitting and enforcement processes, I included this snapshot. If you're a property owner and you look to develop what you consider as just a lakeshore project, depending on where you're working on your lakeshore property, these are all the different authorities or regulatory entities you might need to work with. And there are very specific rules in the shoreland and on the shoreline or out in the lake. So a lot of opportunity for improved collaboration and communication. And really that's the last one is partners and collaboration is going to be key. The big question for my presentation and what I shared with you today is it working? And the good news is we don't know yet, but we have plans to pick up monitoring again, and our management plan, 10-year management plan outlines doing the survey work on these lakes at the beginning of the plan, midway through the plan, and towards the end of the plan. So we're hoping to start to see some trends where maybe we're at least stopping further loss, and if not, maybe even potentially gaining back some ground. So little bit of a tease on that end, but I'll wrap up here and then I think we'll open for any questions. But my takeaways for everybody is quantifying these lakeshore conditions is has really been and truly is critical. It's been amazing, just the basic aspect of collecting this and how much it's helped us engage different decision makers, different landowners. And really that plays into the second point here is education, engagement, and regulatory, both rules and enforcement are all very critical components to correcting this trend. Partnerships are going to be essential. We can't do this through any one bucket alone. Like simple education alone isn't going to work, and regulatory alone isn't going to work. We need to try to find creative ways to engage and get lake landowner support and buy-in on this. And one of the things I didn't necessarily tee up, but I'll end on the positive note is engagement and survey work that we've done is the one common ground we all share is we actually have a shared vision for our lake. Surveying people want what's on the right. They want to recreate, they want clean water, they want a natural aesthetic, they don't want to see other people's stuff. The issue is what we're getting more of is on the right. So the opportunity is how do we craft messaging and work with people to get this type of habitat back? So with that, that is I'll say my thank you. And yeah, I think this is where we open it up, but I'll stop sharing. And if questions come up that require me to pull that back, I certainly will.
Thanks so much, Tom. There are a couple questions in the chat. So Brianna asked, are there grants or resources landowners can use to promote changing their lakeshore?
Yes. I won't go into too much depth on it, but our watershed district, we do have a cost share program that tries to incentivize natural shoreline conditions and the conversion from, say, rock back to something. And then we also, that's kind of one opportunity. The other one we offer is a plant grant. So say you have a natural shoreline and you want some technical support in IDing what plants you have. Maybe you have some invasives, maybe you have some bare spots. Well, we have a plant grant that if you spend $1,000 or more on plants, we'll reimburse $750 to plug in new things. And then we work closely and connect landowners with our SWCD or the Washington Conservation District, and they provide free site visits and technical planning services to really help landowners on this front.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then it looks like Brianna had a follow-up question. If there are grants or resources, are they high enough to deter non-compliance?
No, sorry, that was in response to Phil Monson's. Are there
Oh, yes,
regulatory
there it is.
penalties?
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, I have my screen a little small. Are there regulatory
No problem.
penalties on shoreland owners who are out of compliance for shoreland development? And then Brianna's follow-up question is to that. So my mistake.
Yeah, that is a really interesting one. I mean, there are examples within our watershed of clear violations of DNR, watershed, and LGU rules and or ordinances, and sometimes the violation encompasses all three. I'll just say right now, we're aware and we're trying to figure out a strategy to address that because there is a lot of it becomes political with when you start looking in the rear view mirror. What do you do? What I'll say currently though is the watershed has actually pretty strict rules about what you can do with your shoreline. And I was hired into my position in 2022, and I became the second full-time district staff in my and that was a huge lift in terms of our capacity to respond to public complaints while people were actively altering a shoreline. And I have an example. I think it was like my first 30-day on the job. I got a public complaint, and I showed up on a site, and somebody had a front loader, and they were taking buckets with just bulldozing the entire shoreline. And I asked him to stop, and he didn't, and he kept working. And it just was kind of like this lesson learned of like, okay, this is a violation of everybody. How do we pull in other resources? So since that time, we've kind of implemented things where our trend of new alterations is declining. So the first year when I was here, I think we had 12 after the fact shoreline alteration permits. Last year we had 2. It's been a steady drop. So the message is spreading to people like, you need a permit to alter your shoreline. but it doesn't mean people like what the rules are. So kind of two gamuts. And then, like I said, that whole looking back into the past, it's something that we're aware of, but the political appetite, the evidence, is kind of sometimes hard to produce. But I think everybody is starting to acknowledge, I'll call it the Google waters, or Google Street, where you go around and this type of thing collecting photos is stronger and stronger evidence. It's about as good as evidence as we can start to provide for enforcement. So long-winded way of saying that's kind of probably what I'll share today about enforcement.
Right, if anybody else has any questions, feel free to put those in the chat or unmute. Oh, so there's no enforcement taking place. That is Cameron's question.
There is enforcement to a level. Like I said, there's a capacity aspect, there's a political aspect, but from a capacity standpoint of 12, when I first came in, 12 after the fact alteration shoreline permits, that is a landowner who gets caught in the act of doing something usually puts up a strong fight not to do what the rules are. So permitting processes, voluntary compliance really gets drug out, or it just takes longer. So yes, we're actively pursuing some, but it still does remain a concern.
All right, Phil, you can go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, I just want to say, really nice presentation. I really enjoyed it. I grew up in North Metro, and two of my favorite lakes to fish when I was younger was Big Carnelian and Big Marine. They were phenomenal bass lakes, and they were good northern lakes. And I haven't been back there since I moved up north, but I always wondered what's happening to those lakes. Not only those lakes, but then Chisago counties, Chisago Lakes, Lindstrom area. I see it. I just imagine that's going on there as well. And then you got Forest Lake, that area. They're all desirable areas. They were, fairly nice when I was a kid. And what you're seeing there is not untypical. I mean, I'm in Brainerd now, and it's happening all over in Crow Wing, Cass County. And I shake my head. I want to, get a hold of it here too as well. So I appreciate your efforts. Appreciate the presentation. And I was just wondering, those two lakes, Carnelian and Marine, they have lake associations that are pretty strong. Would you, maybe you've already done that, is present this presentation to the lake association?
Yeah, great question. Yes, we have. Big Carnelian Lake does not have an association. Historically, the lake was developed and all the roads around it are private, so they have private road associations. So we're working on engaging that group. The flip side, Big Marine Lake has a very large and active and engaging lake association that we have a good working relationship with. And all of these groups that kind of have these different types of association groups, we have met with individually and hosted what we call open house events, where we talk not only about the shoreline, but other aspects of how's the water quality, what's the district doing, kind of who we are, to again try to create that more personal connection with people, to just build that rapport and relationship that while we are a governing entity, we're hoping we can build that rapport with you, that you trust us, that what we're sharing with you is important and we need your support and to make these improvements, and yeah, do what's best for probably you both as an individual landowner and your property values, but also the long-term health of the lake. And there's a little bit of dichotomy there in terms of perception of, what's the aesthetic resale value of a property versus what's the potential opportunity with changing that mindset of, a natural landscape can be equally as beneficial in terms of the cost and economics of a lakeshore property. So it's some of the early feedback that we're getting from engaging these groups, which is pretty interesting.
All right.
I know.
Oh, go ahead.
I would say if there's no other questions, one thing I think that I guess we're we're pondering as the watershed district, because we're relying on a lot of, I'll say, state-led initiatives in terms of like these health indices, stressor identifications and stuff. And one of kind of our big questions, our management goal of 75% of lakeshore parcels having 50% naturalized condition or not. I'll say it was kind of tossing a dart at something that seemed good. But I guess the big question is we don't know what that threshold actually is in terms of how much of a lake needs to be naturalized to support. So there's still that question of all of this kind of comes back to, the science opportunity here is to really hone in and try to answer and address that, because then that's going to help lakeshore managers. That's going to be that little bit more critical tidbit of answering, people that are claiming, well, how much is enough? Like, how much do we actually need to do? And when can we stop these enforcements and all these other things? And so we're hearing that equal sentiment. And I think, again, that's an important question. I guess we don't know. And I think we believe that the science and everybody's working towards understanding that a little bit more as well. So.
All right, it is 9:59. If somebody else has a question, feel free to sneak in the chat or raise your hand. Otherwise, we can probably go ahead and wrap up. Thank you so much, Tom, for this incredibly interesting presentation and something I think that as Minnesotans, we all care about and is, close to all of our hearts. So with that, enjoy the rest of your Thursday, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.